Kicking off the list at number 10, Sandman. William Baker entered the world of comics in 1963 with Amazing Spider-Man issue 4. He was seen as one of the main villains in Spider-Man 3, and yes, he was at one point an Avenger. Who knew? So when Flint Marko held the mantle of Sandman, he bumped into the Thing, and they had a little heart-to-heart, a little chat about life and how to use your abilities perhaps for, for good. So he started to help Spider-Man a bit here and there, and then in Avengers issue 329, Captain America announced a new Avengers team, and on that roster was the Sandman. He was one of the 7 reserve members. He of course didn't last because, well, he was a reserve member for one, and coming from the villain side already, I'm sure he had one foot out the door anyways. Shame. And before we continue on with this list, guys, if you haven't already, make sure to hit that like button down below because those little thumbs up are great for the page and great for our studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Now back to some Avengers who became villains. Number 9, Sentry. Making his first appearance in Sentry issue 1, of course, Robert Reynolds was a struggling addict who made his way into a laboratory and discovered something called the Golden Sentry Serum. So of course he consumed it, and then he got the surprise of a lifetime when he was then given the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns. That's a lot of power. That plus a homemade costume equals a brand new superhero. Robert fought alongside the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, then the New Avengers. Things changed for Robert when Norman Osborn decided to put together a little team of his own, the Dark Avengers. So Sentry was also once a Horseman of Death, serving alongside Banshee, Grim Reaper, and Daken. He even considered himself as the heir to Apocalypse at one point, so definitely not an Avenger anymore, for sure. Number 8, Namor. King Namor is of course Marvel's version of Aquaman. He's the king of the seas, and he's also not a fan of metahumans, surprisingly. He mostly would go head to head with Black Panther and Wakanda. He wasn't a fan of Wakanda. He often attacked it quite a bit. He was asked to join the Avengers back in 1963 in Avengers issue 16, but he declined. Too cool for school. We get it. Alright, cool. He did join for a brief amount of time though, but when the Avengers vs. X-Men happened, he stood with the X-Men and he fought Luke Cage and the Thing. What a traitor. I mean, he's not the worst, but if you're not with the Avengers, you're clearly against them. Especially after you've helped them out for a bit and then you change your mind? Come on, dude. Number 7. The Incredible Hulk. So Thor Ragnarok was loosely based off the Planet Hulk storyline. I say loosely because, well, the comics, that story didn't end up going so well, obviously. Because on Sakaar, the rocket that he arrived in ended up blowing to smithereens, causing some casualties that left the Hulk a little heartbroken, to say the least. So he rolls his shoulders back a few times, and then he heads back to Earth, and thus begins the World War Hulk storyline. He just destroys everybody. It's so scary. I mean, all the heroes that Earth has come to love just in the path of this death train. Like, he locks the Illuminati in Madison Square Garden and then makes them fight to the death. It's like Madison Square Up Garden. I mean, once you spend enough time on Sakaar, I guess it becomes second nature. I don't know. The whole story is a bloody good mess. It's great seeing the panic on the Avengers' faces the entire time because they know that they're screwed, and that's what makes it real and scary. Number 6, Sabretooth. Victor Creed made his debut in Iron Fist issue 14, and he's been known as one of Wolverine's biggest rivals. But during the Avengers X-Men Axis storyline, the Red Skull stole the brain of Charles Xavier, and he planned to wipe out all of mutant kind. And then in book 2, we see the inversion, where good goes bad and bad goes good. Interesting time, because Dr. Doom and Scarlet Witch cast a spell, so now Sabretooth was on the good side. So after the dust settled, Iron Man made it so that Sabretooth wouldn't flip back, so Sabretooth joined the Avengers Unity Division. This didn't last forever, and recently in House of X issue 6, Sabretooth faced trial among the Quiet Council, and let's just say he ended up swallowed by Krakoa below the surface, where he's trapped in a state of permanent stasis for the rest of his life. How comfortable. I mean, he kind of made it easy for them too. He clearly didn't fight for his case. Number 5, Hawkeye. In the MCU, Hawkeye's had it pretty rough. I mean, by the time Avengers Endgame rolled out, Clint had lost his entire family, and then 5 years after Thanos snapped his fingers, we catch up with him in Tokyo, and he's not the same guy that we once knew. Now he's taken heads and he's taken names. We get our first look at Ronan. Now, I know that Natasha meets up with him and they have a beautiful moment, and then he rejoins the team. He even volunteers to test the time travel tech himself. But if we look back at Avengers 1, Hawkeye is a villain for like most of that movie. He turns evil before the opening title even pops up on screen. He's the guy who took down the helicarrier. He almost killed everybody on that boat. Now I know Loki had a scepter and that caused it, so if we look at Avengers 1 and Avengers Endgame, I think it's safe to meet in the middle and say that the MCU Hawkeye has been somewhat of a Avenger who turned into a villain, at least for a bit. Number 4. Quicksilver. Pietro Maximoff is the twin brother of Wanda Maximoff, and in Avengers West Coast issue 57 back in 1965, he joined the team. Pietro has been trouble for the team for a long time. I mean, he convinced Wanda to do what she did in House of M. He's framed the Avengers for treason, and he has no problem using pieces of Terrigen to give his daughter Luna special abilities, even though he knows he shouldn't do that. Also, that whole thing with Layla Miller after House of M, where he saved her life just so he can be the one to take her out, believing that she was responsible for the House of M event. Yeah, it's safe to say he went from Avenger to villain. Like, those are just 3 out of many things. In West Coast Avengers 33, Magneto's bloodline got the best of him, and he got fellow Avengers captured by the communist gang. Fastest guy ever, but makes the most mistakes. I don't understand. Number 3, the Vision. Making his glorious debut in Avengers issue 57, the Vision is a synthezoid, and in the comics, he was created by Ultron using parts of the original Human Torch and the mind of Wonder Man. Just bam, smack together. He turned on his original creator, Phineas Horton, and he joined the Avengers. Nice. And then in the MCU, he's created as Ultron's new body, but with the addition of the Mind Stone and a little bit of Jarvis, we have an android Avenger. Also nice. But during the Secret Empire storyline, Vision was part of Hydra's Avengers when they were taking over the world, all from an AI virus. Gotta get that firewall installed, my friend. Arnim Zola was the one to blame for that. So who knows, maybe now with the White Vision being free in the MCU and pretty much reborn, his firewall probably isn't the best either. Also, it's confusing because it appears that Vision gets all of his memories back, but then he flies away and then he's not to be seen for the rest of the show. So clearly something's up here. I'm betting the MCU does him dirty. Maybe they reprogram him to make him evil or something. Or he might become Ultron. That was a big theory for WandaVision. We'll see. Number 2, Captain America. There are a couple lines from Steve Rogers that fans will remember that took place in the MCU, like Avengers Assemble, that is America's ass, but the line Hail Hydra was followed by a roar of applause on opening night of Endgame. Why? Because not only does he use his post-Avengers knowledge to obtain the scepter, which in that of itself is already pretty sweet, but because the audience expects another cool elevator fight and Steve outsmarts us. But the line Hail Hydra comes right from the comics, and a bit of a darker scenario. The last words of Captain America Steve Rogers were that of Hail Hydra, and fans were not happy. This was huge news. People were pretty upset. Readers were sending in death threats. Like, could you imagine? The 2017 series Secret Empire concluded that bad Captain America was a double and that the good guy was locked in the cosmic cube. Okay, solid save, but those images of evil Steve will live in our heads rent-free, so thank you for that. And finally, number 1, Scarlet Witch. Of course, I'm saving her for last, of course. She's the daughter of Magneto and the twin brother of Quicksilver, aka Pietro Maximoff. Now, she was on her father's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, but at one point she did of course join the Avengers as well. She's one of the biggest Marvel characters ever, and during the events of M-Day, she spoke those 3 words, no more mutants, and just like that, a mass amount of mutants were depowered or wiped out. That large number being 986,618, only leaving a couple hundred left. That's crazy, that's like Thanos level destruction almost. And then in the MCU as well, we just watched Wanda become a villain over a 9-week period. She had a mental breakdown similar to M-Day, and she trapped Westview in her hex. Now, of course, she frees everybody and things look pretty back to normal, kind of, by the end of the show. But with that after credit scene of her studying the Darkhold, and with the given knowledge that Wanda is in the next Doctor Strange movie, she's for sure going to become a villain. Even for a little bit, she'll be a villain, for sure. I can't wait to see what else she does. She looked like she was studying up pretty fast while she was sipping tea on her doorstep, so I don't know. Her mind's crazy. She can do anything she wants. Number 10, Scarlet Witch. So many of us like to see the Scarlet Witch as this misunderstood magic user that is just looking for love. Well, she used to be one of the original members of the Brotherhood of Evil. She was teamed up with Magneto right from the start, and for years she thought her powers were only mutant powers. I mean, it made sense her brother Quicksilver was a mutant and the two of them were both working for Magneto. He was a mutant and everybody they were fighting was also a mutant. But after Scarlet Witch and her brother decided to part ways from the Brotherhood, they would decide that they needed to start using their powers for good and join the Avengers. It's wild how in comic books you can go from domestic terrorist to hero like that fast. It's Incredible. But even after Scarlet Witch would decide to be a hero, it wouldn't be the last time she would do something to hinder nearly every hero in the world. And of course, I'm referring to the infamous M-Day would have Scarlet Witch use her powers to rewrite reality and see it to that the mutants are nearly extinct. This was partly caused by her relationship with Magneto, who's her dad, and a very not great dad, I can also say. And before we go to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and give us a thumbs up on this video, because it does go a long way for our channel. Helps us out quite a bit. You guys are the best. Now back to some Avengers who used to be villains. Number 9, Wonder Man. It's hard to know in the Marvel Universe when you're being tricked because everyone has got a plan up their sleeve, even the good guys. But if you're working with a tactical Baron von Zemo, then you better believe that he's doing something dirty behind the scenes. See, Wonder Man used to just be a regular working class man. Actually, his story is nearly identical to that of the Vulture in the MCU. He's a working man. Stark puts him out of the business and then he has to do whatever he can to try and make ends meet. So eventually he's given the option to use advanced tech to get back at the people who wronged him, and he loves the idea of that. I mean, I'm kind of on board with that too, let's do it. That opportunity would come back when Baron von Zemo would approach him with a proposition. He would give Wonder Man, who was then just Simon Williams, the power of ionic energy so he could have the power to crush Iron Man. But partway through his anger faded and he decided that taking on Iron Man wasn't the answer after all. So the two of them turned on Baron von Zemo. But here's the catch. The Baron isn't going to get caught with his pants down. He had Poison Williams, who would soon die after. So his hero life was short-lived because once you die in comics, you are dead forever. Moment of silence. Only for a bit because he came back later on. Yeah, he came back. He was brought from the dead and is now a registered member of the Avengers. So welcome back. Number 8, The Winter Soldier. You should know the story of the Winter Soldier by now. If you've not seen that movie yet, please go check it out because it's arguably the best movie in the MCU. And the story of the Winter Soldier has more flip-flops than a beach in Florida. The Winter Soldier was formerly Bucky Barnes, the best friend and right-hand man of Captain America. A tragic accident would have him fall to his death, or so Steve Rogers thought. It turns out Hydra got a hold of him and used some experimental tech to not only give him one of the most badass robotic arms that I've ever seen, but they also brainwashed him to be a living weapon. They used his advanced war training and then embedded him with Hydra assassination techniques. He was then frozen over and over again, only to be thawed out when Hydra needed to send him out to kill somebody. But eventually he would cross paths with Steve Rogers and the old memories would come flooding back to him. He would fight back against his Hydra programming and turn to become a good guy, even if he had to fight Iron Man to do it. Number 7, Hawkeye. Man, to think that one of the main members of the MCU used to be a bad guy, I mean, like, it's not that hard to believe now, but when you see him break down in Avengers Endgame and start chasing down gangs in Tokyo, then it all starts to make sense how this guy can have a dark side. But the first couple of times that we see Hawkeye show up, he was working with Black Widow, someone who actually we'll be mentioning later on this list. She would get him to tag along on missions where the two of them had to take down the flying tin can man known as Iron Man. But there wasn't enough hate in Hawkeye's heart to keep him on the dark side, and he eventually swapped over to work with the heroes, and since then, he hasn't looked back. Number 6, Loki. Now, never an official member of the Avengers. I mean, he didn't stand with them when every hero in the MCU teamed up to storm Thanos' army and save the universe, but he did some of the most heroic acts that set everything up so the Avengers could save the day. He summoned Surtur so that he could take out Hela. He teamed up with Thor to save the people of Asgard, and he even threw his life on the line to try and kill Thanos. The guy's time as a hero is pretty short-lived, but he did come through when it counted, and I think the Avengers will look back at him as one of the most heroic members of them all. Just saying. Number 5, Red Hulk. I really love the Hulk's villains. I mean, you have the leader, which kind of represents the opposite of the Hulk, all brains with very little brawn. But then so many of his other villains are just like him, but slightly different, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Let's just get 2 cannonballs and fire them at each other and see what happens. Boom. The results are usually pretty explosive. Well, if you didn't know, Red Hulk is the general who always wanted the Hulk dead. Thaddeus Ross. I guess he went down the if you can't beat him, join him line, thinking that when it came to taking out the big green beast, he was actually able to keep his identity a secret, but once it was finally revealed who he was, it would be Captain America that would team up with him. With the two of them having a military background, it kind of made sense. It also made sense for the Red Hulk to become a hero. I mean, Thaddeus wasn't that far off in his quest to stop the Hulk, even though the big green beast is a force for good most of the time. He would be seen as a threat to everybody else around him. And Thaddeus seemed to have better control over his version of the Hulk than Bruce ever did. Number 4, Namor. It doesn't matter what comic book universe you're in, You gotta have a fish dude. That's just a staple of how everything works. That's it. And for the Marvel Universe, we of course have Namor. The Submariner, he was actually one of the original villains in Marvel. The dude's pretty old, with his first comic coming out in 1939. He's the ruler of Atlantis, and he didn't like the way things were handled on the surface, so he decided to duke it out with the people walking on land. Turns out that he wasn't a match for the people on the surface, so he decided to join them. He would eventually team up with the Avengers, but even though he was now fighting side by side with them, he's always had a superiority complex when it comes to dealing with surface-dwelling super people. And even though the Avengers saw him as an ally, when push came to shove, he would ditch them and team with the X-Men to try and take down the Avengers. He even flooded Wakanda, which seems like a bit of an overreaction. He's always had a sore spot when it comes to the Black Panther. I think maybe it's because he hates seeing a surface civilian as advanced as Atlanteans. Could be. Number 3, Vision. Even though the MCU will have you thinking that Vision was made by the Avengers to take out Ultron, it was really the other way around. Hank Pym's least favorite kid would make the android as a tool to take out the Avengers. I guess he didn't feel like getting his hands dirty that day. Okay. Well, he should have done a better job at programming the damn thing, because while fighting the Avengers, Vision decides to swap sides and teaming up with the good guys, which in the end seems to be the worst possible thing that could happen for Ultron. You build something to kill the Avengers, but then it turns on you, and then the Avengers are now stronger, but then all the secrets that this machine knows about you will be leaked to them. But now Vision has become one of the most famous members of the Avengers, with him and Wanda starring in the new WandaVision TV show on Disney+. And don't worry if you haven't gotten around to watching that yet. I'm not going to ruin anything for you, but you definitely should go and watch it right now. We're only 3 episodes in, so you got time to catch up before it ends. Plenty of time. Number 2, Black Widow. I mean, her name is Black Widow, so I mean, that's not usually how heroes are named unless they're an anti-hero, like the Punisher, you know? It should be no surprise that she's super sneaky, and she actually used to be one of Iron Man's greatest villains. The Black Widow started out as an agent sent over from Russia to bring down one of the founding members of the Avengers. It's kind of weird to think that in Marvel universes that would be developed down the line, she would be one of the founding members. Awesome. But the villain was just so popular that nobody wanted to see her go. And after the Cold War ended, the story of a Russian agent that was sent over to dismantle a part of America that everybody loved just wasn't as compelling as it once was. And number 1, Doctor Doom. Now I know this is only for a limited time, but it's still so wild that it deserves a spot on this list, a very high spot on this list. We're talking about the same Doctor Doom that once was ruling Battleworld, the same Doctor Doom that stole Odin's powers, the same guy. He's one of the biggest, baddest villains that gives Thanos a run for his money with the amount of schemes that he's pulled. Well, there was a time when Victor Von Doom suffered a pretty serious blow to the head, an injury that would take out most people, but we're not talking about most people, are we? Valeria came through to fix up Doom's brain, and not long after that, he was working with the good guys. Right around this time, Tony was in a deep coma, so someone needs to step in the role of Iron Man, and who better than Doctor Doom himself? Having Doom become Iron Man for that brief moment was one of the coolest moments ever, hands down.
Starting us off in at number 10, Kang the Conqueror. Kang is by far one of the Avengers' most notorious villains, so much so that fans of the MCU have actually speculated he'll be the next big bad in future phases. Now in the comics though, he's almost destroyed Earth in an attempt to gain the power of Celestial. The time-traveling villain has had many different iterations over the years, as is the case when you're a character who has traveled to vastly different eras. But the reason why he's earned their respect came from his later years in the comics, when his teenage self became Iron Lad and led the Young Avengers. That version of Kang had an almost tragic story though. Well, actually pretty tragic, since he was forced to return to his own era knowing that he would become Kang the Conqueror, something he had to do in order to preserve the timeline and ultimately save his teammates. Oh, my heart is breaking. Up next, number 9, Ultron. In the comics, Ultron was created by Hank Pym as a defense protocol that he concocted that eventually exceeded Hank's own intelligence, and decided it had greater ambitions. Now for the past 5 decades, Ultron is a character that has kept the Avengers on their toes, and in the Age of Ultron story arc and alternate future timeline, he actually defeated the team, and has taken over the planet, very different than the MCU one. Despite all of the crazy time travel shenanigans Ultron has caused the team to endure over the years, he's also responsible for the creation of Vision, and he's a character whose intelligence is something that several members on the team can at bare minimum respect. Even look to the MCU to see a similar result. Tony Stark, with the help of Bruce Banner, created Ultron in the movies, a robotic being whose intelligence and snark he can at least say matches his own, if not excels altogether. In at number 8, Hank Pym. Okay, hear us out on this one. Traditionally, Hank Pym is a superhero, but he's had moments where he's antagonized the Avengers and purposely put them in danger for his own means. And yes, while those moments happened under extreme duress and were the result of his poor state of mental health, technically speaking, you could still argue that his actions were villainous. When he was court-martialed from the Avengers, he concocted a plan to have one of his robotic creations attempt to kill the team, with him saving the day and therefore getting back in their good graces. Janet of course protested, and then he beat her. As you can imagine, his plans clearly backfired, and he was outed from the team altogether, but eventually joined up as an advisor with the West Coast Avengers, where he almost committed suicide. That being said, he's also a character that the Avengers saw needed help, eventually, and has managed to get back into their good graces. These days, Hank is a combination of himself and our previous number Ultron, an actual hybrid between the two, although it was revealed that the hybrid is kind of one-sided. It's more so Ultron wearing Hank as a skin suit. Yeah, the whole thing has us feeling a little unsettled too. In at 7, Cyclops. Again, yes, we have a number that is technically a superhero, but has had a history of straying from the path of good into one where he let a bunch of teenagers become murderers. Just cuz. When Cyclops first hit the scene in the X-Men issue 1 in 1963, Scott Summers was the leader of said team, working under Charles Xavier to guide the team of mutants to successful victories on the battlefield and in missions. But over time, Scott changed. During the Schism story event, we saw a more villainous side of Cyclops emerge, and later during Avengers vs. X-Men, after Cyclops had started up his own team of X-Men on Utopia, and the Phoenix Force was all like, hey, I'm back on Earth, and using Hope Summers as a host, Cyclops found himself up against the Avengers. Now Captain America and the Avengers wanted to take Hope into custody to protect the Earth, fearing what the Phoenix Force may try to do. It does have a pretty bad track record. Cyclops, though, believed that Hope and the Phoenix Force could be used to jumpstart the mutant population. Major conflict ensues, and Scott only got darker from there. Needless to say, despite being arrested and ending up in prison and still having pretty messed up ideologies, he's cooperative with the Avengers and even lets Iron Man study him for remaining effects of the Phoenix Force. Now these days he's trying to get back on track as a good guy. But at least before he lost his crap, he was a respectable leader for mutants to look up to, and for a long time, that was something the Avengers respected as well. In at 6, Nebula. Nebula is a character in both the comics and the cinematic adaptations that has managed to earn the respect of Avengers members. More so in the MCU if we're being honest. Let's look at the comics though. Thanos, who is her grandfather in the comics, was pissed off that Nebula claimed kinship to him, and proceeded to almost kill her after he got all the Infinity Gems, transforming her into a corpse-like figure, always almost on the verge of death but never actually dying, but not truly alive either. He was like really proud of that. Actually, Thanos, no. She remained maimed and disfigured, but when Thanos defeated Eternity and his consciousness expanded into the universe, she took advantage of his comatose body and stole the gauntlet from him. She reversed what he had done and banished him. Now while she wanted to use it to take over the universe, you gotta give it to her. Managing to do what no one else could is a pretty big feat and something to respect. And in the MCU, she's a villain turned hero, aiding after Thanos' snap, or as the MCU now refers to it, the blip, and helping the Avengers to return the world the way it was, and to finally defeat her adoptive father once and for all, despite her being the unintentional reason why the 2014 timeline Thanos was able to head on over to the present timeline, stir up a massive battle, and eventually, indirectly, cause the death of Tony Stark. We can't blame her for that. In at 5, Adam Warlock. Adam Warlock has done a lot for the Marvel Universe. He's the one who spearheaded the attack on Thanos in the 1991 Infinity Gauntlet story arc. The comic that, if you didn't catch it from our last number, was the primary basis for the MCU's Avengers Infinity War film. Warlock is the one who orchestrates the attack on Thanos after he's snapped, managing not only to recruit heroes, but cosmic entities and even Celestials. And Dr. Doom, who's like really reluctant and doesn't trust him. Actually pretty funny. Eventually, after Nebula grabs the gauntlet from Thanos, Warlock manages to convince the Mad Titan to help him get it back, and ultimately saves the day. That's without even getting into the sequel miniseries, of course. But here's the thing with Adam Warlock. While he's highly respected in the Marvel Universe, especially by the Avengers, he's also got an evil half, a Magus. There's been 3 incarnations of the Magus over the years, with the second version being one that is expelled from Adam's soul after he acquires the Infinity Gauntlet. That evil part of his soul becomes the corporeal form of the Magus, and ends up seeking out the gauntlet for himself. He even recently appeared in the Infinity War storyline as well. You know, that recent one where all the heroes got like smucked together? He was found by Gamora in a cocoon. By smucked I mean amalgamated. You get it, schmuck. And at 4, Norman Osborn. Norman Osborn is definitely a really bad dude, but the reason why he's respected by the likes of the Avengers, not including Spider-Man to be fair, is that in recent years he's fluctuated between being a baddie and being an anti-hero. But let's jump back for a sec. In contemporary comics, he went from being Peter Parker's arch-nemesis to a full-blown Avengers enemy, taking on the guise of the Iron Patriot in the process. He was once the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hammer, and even started up a team called the Dark Avengers. And that, my friends, is exactly why he ended up on our list. Aside from his intelligence and business savvy, which, the likes of Tony Stark can at least nod to, Osborn was once respected by a group of Avengers. Technically, the Dark Avengers, which just so happened to be his very own team of Avengers, but it still counts, right? Technically Avengers. And at 3, Scarlet Witch. Scarlet Witch's origins in the comics established her as a villain before she became a part of the second iteration of Avengers. She and her brother Pietro initially joined up with Magneto, prior to knowing that he was Daddy Dearest, might I add, and joined his Brotherhood of Evil Mutants in order to repay him for saving them from a mob. Eventually, after Magneto is abducted by the cosmic entity Stranger, the Brotherhood disassembles, and the two, feeling that their debt has been paid, end up moving on and becoming Avengers. But let's talk about the real reasons why she's on this list. She may be a hero, but her mental instability in the comics has caused her to turn her back against her peers in catastrophic ways. During Avengers Disassembled, she discovers from a mildly intoxicated Wasp that she had children with Vision once upon a time, 2 twins, and that information was hidden from her for years. Naturally, she loses it, as any person would if they found that out, except she has reality-altering abilities, which makes this bad. She resurrects villain Jack of Hearts to kill the Avengers, blowing up the Avengers mansion, and then murders Scott Lang through the explosion. She forces Vision to crash the Quinjet into the mansion and then makes him cough up pieces of himself that turn into little Ultrons, and then She-Hulk ends up ripping him in half, killing him in order to prevent more Ultrons. Wanda then uses her abilities to summon Kree warships, which then causes Hawkeye's death. And then later on, Quicksilver would manipulate her to create a world where mutants were the dominant race and Avengers didn't exist. So all in all, when Girl has a grudge, she goes hard on dishing out revenge. At the end of the day though, she is still an Avenger and a hero. So despite all this, she does have the respect of some of the members of the team, or at least the ones that she hasn't killed in the past. Moving on to number 2, Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom fits the classic villain trope of villain with a point. Now, despite all of his personality flaws, he genuinely wants the world to be the best it can be, which of course to him means he needs to be the one ruling it. Funny enough, in an alternate reality in which he does rule, it's actually the best possible outcome, despite all of the evil things that he's done. Regardless of that, Doom's behavior is dictated by strict codes he chooses to follow. Doom has been known to keep his exact word and has a code of honor. The latter led him to save Captain America from drowning because Cap had previously saved his life. He also kept Spider-Man alive once after the hero had saved him from terrorists attacking him at an airport. He also won't attack a foe who's weakened or at a severe disadvantage, since he believes a victory in that state is hollow and meaningless. In addition to that, his magical skills have gotten him the respect of characters like Doctor Strange, who once admitted that Doom had the chops to be Sorcerer Supreme. All in all, he's a narcissist, but there's some good in there. Such a complex character. And finally, in at number 1, Loki. For starters, Loki is the OG Avengers villain, the very first, and the reason the Avengers were brought together, technically speaking. In the first Avengers comic, Thor ends up needing some assistance with his dastardly brother, so he ends up working with the Hulk, Ant-Man the Wasp, and Iron Man to take on his trickster god sibling. Now this is before Cap was defrosted from his block of ice. In the process, Loki uses the Hulk to fight against them. For years he's been causing trouble for the Avengers, but he's also earned the respect of many of their members. Take Spider-Man for example. After the web-slinger helped him out, he gave Parker a favor that later, the hero cashed in to help save an innocent civilian. Parker even promised to put in a good word for Loki to other members of the superhero community. Aww. Loki has become more of an anti-hero in recent times, and despite sometimes still having his own best interests at heart, he's turned a leaf, something that several Avengers members have grown to respect. And do we even need to bring up the MCU Loki? Loki is one of the most beloved villains to appear up on the big screen, and even managed to work his way back into the hearts of our heroes, helping his brother Thor out in a big way during Thor Ragnarok. And now he's getting his own show, so that's dope. And at number 10, Taskmaster. Taskmaster's got some pretty neat abilities. After injecting himself with a Nazi-created primer, aka a modified adrenal steroid cortisol, his mind's procedural memory potential was unlocked, allowing him to absorb knowledge immediately. This extends to his muscle memory, meaning when he sees someone fight he can mimic their moves, making him a rather difficult individual to battle since he can predict what other characters will do next in a fight. The only person who manages to evade this ability of Taskmaster's is Deadpool, due to the character being so darn unpredictable. In the comics, comics, Taskmaster actually has defeated multiple Avenger characters, including Hank Pym's Yellow Jacket and the Wasp, and managed to fight both Iron Man and Captain America without completely getting his butt kicked. While it would be really darn lucky if Taskmaster managed to defeat the whole team, he's still got a decent chance of throwing them off guard and getting the upper hand if coming at them unprepared, or if they fought him with no knowledge of his abilities. Although these days in the comics he's considerably less threatening, having joined the Secret Avengers despite having a history of being a sleeper agent. Moving on to number 9, Cyclops. Cyclops is one of the original X-Men members, meaning it's likely that in the future of the MCU, whenever the X-Men are introduced, we'll be seeing Scott Summers make an appearance, running with the good guys. But he isn't always good in the comics. During the Avengers vs. X-Men story event, Cyclops was a major threat to the Avengers, and like the main antagonist in that story arc. Subjectively speaking. In the story arc, Cyclops becomes possessed by the Phoenix Force, and he essentially conquers Earth, which forces the Avengers into hiding. Cyclops would eventually lose control of the Phoenix Force, becoming Dark Phoenix, and he would kill Charles Xavier. But he is later defeated by his daughter, Hope Summers, and Scarlet Witch. Not saying that we'll be seeing Scott's more nefarious side anytime soon, but it's something that once upon a time was a prominent threat, so who knows how things may pan out in the future. And at number 8, M.O.D.O.K. M.O.D.O.K is a villain that's existed in the comics since 1967, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And in case you're wondering, his name stands for mental organism designed only for killing, or at least that's what he made his name stand for. The M also sometimes stands for mobile or mechanized, might I add. Anywho, he was initially an employee of AIM before they used him for an experiment, which turned him into M.O.D.O.K, and he rebelled against them, taking over AIM in the process. He's not only got a superhuman intellect in that big ol' head of his, he's got psionic powers and the ability to calculate probabilities too. Here's the thing though, the likelihood that we'd ever see M.O.D.O.K entering the live action MCU doesn't seem super viable. Recently the character was announced to be getting his own animated series on Disney's streaming service, and it seems to be an adaptation that will make the character more of an anti-hero rather than a flat-out villain. Plus, I don't think anyone ever wants to imagine the possibility of M.O.D.O.K manipulating Carol Danvers into thinking he's a hot little piece that she can make out with. Yes, that actually happened in the comics. Moving on. In at 7, Dr. Doom. Victor Von Doom may not originate as an Avengers villain, but he's come into conflict with the team in the comics many a time, along with some of their members individually over the years. He's perhaps one of the most nerve-wracking villains thanks to his abilities. Victor is a scientist, a sorcerer, an inventor, and a polymath with a genius-level intellect. He can manipulate electricity, project and absorb energy, create protective shields, and can summon demons thanks to that sorcery. But perhaps his most defiant traits are his remarkably indomitable will and his code of honor. He once saved Captain America from drowning because Cap had saved his life in the past. He knows how to take advantage of a situation and can be cunning and manipulative when he needs to be. Combining technology and sorcery has made him quite deadly. Now that the rights for the character and the Fantastic Four are in the hands of Marvel Studios and Disney, I'm sure we'll eventually see Dr. Doom make an appearance in the MCU. Whether or not that'll have anything to do with the Avengers though, who knows? And at number 6, Thanos. Technically this is true. The first time around in Infinity War, Thanos defeated the Avengers and was successful in his plan to eliminate half of all living things in the universe. And then in the Prime timeline in Endgame, he used the stones to destroy the stones before Thor decapitated him. The second time around in Endgame, when 2014 Thanos showed up on the Prime timeline, he almost defeated them again if it weren't for Tony Stark sacrificing himself to kill off Thanos and his army once and for all. All of the spoilers in this number. Needless to say, if another timeline Thanos popped into the Prime timeline again, we know that the Mad Titan would be one hell of a threat for the Avengers, with or without the Infinity Stones in his possession. And at number 5, Magus. Who's worse than Thanos? Well, how about the guy who ends up wielding the gauntlet in the comics after Thanos fails? Rather, the guy's evil self. We're talking about Adam Warlock's less ethical other half, Magus. So for context, during Warlock's cosmic travels, he comes across the Universal Church of Truth and their god, a fellow named Magus. Turns out that Magus is himself from the future, a corrupted version who occasionally pops up to screw with Adam. Magus believes that the concepts of good and evil are tools that allow one to change sentient beings, and craves all to worship him. And if they don't, he'll just kill them. What about his powers? Well, he's got cosmic awareness, he's a shapeshifter, he can summon the in-betweener, he can manipulate energy, absorb a being's life force, he uses quantum magic, can manipulate time and transmute reality, is psionic, and of course possesses superhuman strength and all that jazz. Overall, he's incredibly deadly. I think I'd probably prefer to stick to Adam Warlock instead. In at 4, Sentry aka Void. Sentry aka Robert Reynolds may have only been introduced into the Marvel Universe back in 2000, but he's definitely not a threat to take lightly. He was granted his powers from a super soldier serum that moves his molecules an instant ahead of the current timeline, although in the Age of Sentry miniseries it's implied that he's actually a refugee sentient life force from another universe. He's a little like Superman to an extent, but said to be omnipotent, who generally holds back his full might. When he was first introduced though, Robert was a depressed chubby dude who started remembering a different past, which unravels the truth, that he existed in the Marvel Universe all along, but everyone's memories have been altered to forget him entirely. This is because Robert was trying to suppress Void, an entity within him who has all the same powers as Sentry does. He can shapeshift, control weather, and create something called Infinity Trundles too, which attacks one's mind in traumatic ways. He's gone toe-to-toe with some of the most powerful beings in the Marvel Universe as well. Needless to say, you can imagine why the Avengers would prefer Sentry over Void. Moving on to number 3, Mephisto. Mephisto is literally Marvel's version of the devil. He's based on Mephistopheles, the demon from the Foss legend, and first appeared back in the Silver Age in 1968 in The Silver Surfer issue 3. Written by Stan Lee, the character would be a tempter who offered the Silver Surfer the world, dangling his off-limits long-distance lover in front of him too. All things that the Surfer rejected thanks to his goodness and nobility, but thus started a pattern with the character in the comics. He's constantly used as a vehicle for temptation, making deals with the devil, and he's always a character ready to take advantage of a situation. Hell, he even hung out with Thanos while the Mad Titan had the Infinity Stones in the 1991 Infinity Gauntlet series, knowing that the Mad Titan was emotionally unstable. So what makes him deadly? Well, he's an immortal entity with magical powers, capable of a whole lot. He can alter time, alter memories, project illusions, shape and size shift, has superhuman strength and durability. And if his physical form is destroyed, he can regenerate and reform in his home domain. So why make deals with characters? Well, Mephisto cannot subjugate the will of another without their permission, which is why he manipulates them through pacts. So you can see how something like that could get real tricky for the Avengers of the MCU. The closest we've ever gone to that kind of deep-rooted manipulation was likely in Age of Ultron, when Scarlet Witch manipulated their minds. And well, that kinda screwed a few of them up for a little while, so Mephisto could be an issue. In at 2, Galactus. Next to Thanos, Galactus is one of the biggest bads to ever find himself in the panels of Marvel Comics. But here's the thing about Galactus. He's not evil per se. Rather, the reason Galactus does what he does best, going around and devouring planets, is because he's fulfilling his hunger. He's essential to the balance of the universe. Guess no one filled Thanos in on that, did they? In the MCU, that is. Yet in the comics, Galactus has been a major threat of the planets, having decided on Earth as a planet suitable for his consumption. So, needless to say, he would be a gigantic threat for the Avengers if he ever did come their way. And finally, in at number 1, KORVAC. KORVAC first appeared in 1975 in Giant Size Defenders issue 3, created by Jim Starlin, who also created Thanos, and Steve Gerber. Initially, KORVAC was meant to be a throwaway character, a dude named Michael KORVAC who hailed from Earth 691, and went through some serious crap. He was a computer technician who, after the alien Brotherhood of Badoon invaded his planet, was punished by them when falling asleep at work, turning his upper body into a machine, essentially making him a cyborg. He's used by the Grandmaster as a pawn in battling Doctor Strange and the Defenders, but after an encounter with the Guardians and Thor, he became a real threat. Enter the KORVAC saga. KORVAC fled his universe and came to Earth 616, where he stumbles upon Galactus' space station, and decides to download Galactus' knowledge into his own body. This causes him to be imbued with the power cosmic, essentially becoming a god, and he decides to reshape Earth into a utopia. Elders of the universe begin to sense his existence. The Collector, in an act of protection, decides to remake his own daughter, Karina, into a powerful being to use as a weapon against him, but she and KORVAC fall in love. KORVAC is eventually found out by the heroes of Earth and is forced into battle, killing a ton of heroes in the process. And after defeating them all, what does he do? He commits suicide after sensing that Karina doubts him, and in the process restores the Avengers and Guardians to life before he dies. While the KORVAC saga has been occasionally criticized for its storyline, you can't deny that he'd make an interesting villain for the Avengers to take on in the future of the MCU, especially now that there's all these alternate realities that are popping up and exist.